Alright, so today I'd like to have a bit of a free-ranging chat about the new Striker's Gearset, and a thought that I've really had sort of rolling around in my head for a number of months now, but because I haven't actually been covering or speaking about the division at all, I really haven't externalized this in the slightest, so here we go, I'm going to talk about it now. The new classified gear sets have just been released, and I'm going to talk about them in the next little while. The first thing I'll say is that I'm only going to talk about these in a PvE context, not PvP. I cannot play Last Stand in Australia because I cannot get any games. I queue up for like 20 minutes and I can't get a queue to pop, so unfortunately that experience is not available to me, and the Dark Zone is a bit of a sort of, it's not the best place to go at the best of times, especially if you want a fair proving ground to test out gear. So I'm speaking purely about PvE perspective, how these gear sets perform there. I'm going to leave other people to talk about the PvP side of things. As I tested out the new Striker's gear set, I realized very quickly that this gear set was completely broken. It's no surprise. For anyone that doesn't know the detail, they're adding new classified gear sets in patch 1.7. These are essentially the same as your existing gear set, so Striker and Sentry, etc. However, they now have a 6-piece bonus. When you get 6 pieces of classified gear, you unlock the 6th bonus. The 6th bonus is an extension of the power fantasy granted by the original gear set. In the case of Striker, Striker's 4-piece bonus gives you a stacking damage buff, and the more accurate you are, the more times you hit your target, the more this stacks up and you start doing more damage. The 6-piece bonus gives you a stacking heal buff in addition to that, but it's very different to the stacking damage buff. The stacking damage buff actually disappears when I miss shots, so it's actually really hard to maintain consistent stacks with that damage buff. The healing buff, on the other hand, does not decay when I miss my shots. It just stays there forever. Well, when I say forever, it does decay, but it decays really slowly. So if I'm progressing through a mission at a reasonable pace, it's actually really easy for me to keep it at max stacks. Upon testing this thing down in the firing range, I immediately discerned that this thing was broken as all fuck. The math behind this is not right. It's meant to return a certain amount of your health, a certain percentage, but they clearly got a decimal point wrong somewhere, and it basically fills your health bar up immediately after you take damage. Now, of course, that needs to change. It's ridiculous. Anyone that says otherwise is being silly. However, I do think there's a discussion that needs to be had about how it feels to use this gear set right now and what it teaches us about where this game is and where it needs to go in its year 2 life cycle. I think one of the biggest frustrations for players in the last little while is that so many things have been nerfed so aggressively in the name of PvP balance that characters have lost a large amount of their overall player power fantasy. In many looter shooters, it's possible to reach a state where you feel very powerful against the vast majority of PvE content that you come up against. If you gear properly and you play well, you can usually solo most content, or if you can't solo it, you can certainly take it down with a bit of effort with 1 or 2 friends along. The Division hasn't quite got that balance right. While striving to achieve PvP balance, almost every gear set has been significantly nerfed, same with abilities and same with weapons. And the net effect now is that even on challenge modes, the game feels pretty hard. It's not particularly easy to solo a challenge mode. Now I know there's lots of people out there that can do that. I can do that as well, don't get me wrong. If I really knuckle down, I can do it, but it's certainly not a walk in the park, and I don't feel particularly powerful when I do that. Legendary is where things get really, really tricky, and there are many players to this day that still can't do legendary missions with match-made groups or even with organized groups, and incursions on heroic difficulty are still extremely difficult for very, very organized groups. I've always been an advocate for the game to be a hard game in the right ways, for those that want it to be hard, and I think that legendary difficulty is actually really perfectly tuned, to be honest with you. It's meant to be really tricky. It's meant to be for the elite. It's meant to be for the top of the top, the people that still have a group that they can run with to break content. And I think heroic incursions sort of fit into that same category. These are meant to be the top tier challenges offered, and they're meant to be focused on group play. I think the Division starts to fall down in the challenge mode difficulty, where it starts to push out solo players. And I think that's a particularly pronounced problem at this point because of the huge collapse in the player base after the Year 2 announcement. I'm not going to get into a big argument about whether or not this game is dead, because honestly that's a stupid argument, but we need to honestly realize that far fewer people are playing this game than ever before, something I alluded to earlier, where in Australia it's very hard for me to find groups, and I literally cannot find any groups for Last Stand. In instances where it's much more difficult for people to find groups, I think it's natural that the developer respond to that by increasing player power and making it easier for them to solo activities. In that context, I think that they're really onto something with this Striker set. Obviously, this thing needs to be tuned. It's broken right now beyond all measure, but I don't think it should be completely nerfed to the ground. I think the power that it gives me to solo challenge mode content is something that developers need to note. I think it's something that they need to reflect on as they think about their future gear set design. I do think there is a need for gear sets to grant solo players more power, and I do think Strikers is a really good step in that direction. Many of the other gear sets in the game don't offer the same sort of single player power that Strikers does. Sentry provides bonus damage, but it does have a fair amount of ramp up time. Reclaimers is a healing set. Hunter's Faith is a damage mitigation set. Predator's Mark provides very little bonus damage because it takes a fair amount of time for those bleeds to tick. Final Measure soaks up grenades, and so on and so on. Strikers is a really good example of a set that just makes you stronger, and I think it's time for that sort of design philosophy to begin permeating the other sets rather than this set be brought down to make it less powerful. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't need to be fixed. Of course it needs to be fixed, it's broken, but there is something there in that design philosophy that I think the other gear sets could tap into. If every gear set could give you the capability to comfortably solo challenge mode content, or at least more comfortably solo it than we can do now, then I think that's a good thing for the game in the long term. We need to recognize that this game is not what it was in Year 1. It's a fundamentally different game now with a different player base. I think the time that we have now with this game in Year 2, with this limited population, needs to be spent making the player feel really strong and really powerful. And if the developer can find ways to provide us that fantasy without breaking the PvP side of the game, then I really don't see any harm in doing it. I took this broken Striker's gear set into Legendary difficulty to see if I could solo that, and while I'm sure I could probably do it if I really tried, it was really fucking hard. Like, it was hard. I was getting folded very regularly because the Striker set doesn't really stop you from taking damage, and Legendary difficulty is very much about rapid burst damage from enemies all at once, and so that's why the set doesn't really make you super overpowered. The same sort of thing would happen, no doubt, if I took this thing into Heroic Incursion when there are lots of enemies and they each have a lot of health. Strikers is broken, but I do feel as though it provides an interesting design blueprint for the developers to reflect on. My hope is that they provide solo players better platforms to be more powerful, because more and more we are playing solo when we play this game. In Year 1 of the Division, when the game was fresher and the player population was larger, I think I was looking for a much harder and more tactical team-based experience. But now that we're sort of doing the same missions again and again, and the player population is smaller, I kind of just like logging on and messing around, and part of that is being able to do that on my own. If I can get gear sets that allow me just to log in and feel powerful and have fun, I think that's the right design direction for the game. But anyway, that's just my opinion, guys, and I'd really like to hear what you have to say about it, and obviously pass that on to Massive. The whole point of a PTS is that we test shit out and we let Massive know what they think. So obviously leave a comment below, let me know what you think, and obviously I'll try and like echo that in my future videos, because I'm going to be talking about the other gear sets as well. But don't forget to post on Reddit and post on Twitter and post on the official forums. Give Massive feedback about what you think, or about what you're seeing in the PTS. If you're playing it, or if you're not, if you're just watching videos like this, tell Massive what you think, and they're going to be able to craft the game that you want. This is our game now in Year 2, right? This is our game because we're the ones that are still here playing it. So I'm sure Massive just want to deliver the best product they can for us. I'm sure they want to listen to your voice. Let's give them as much voice as we can. Anyway guys, thanks very much for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.